Alan is a 30-year-old hardcore gamer who hasn't seen sunlight in weeks at this point, but who could blame him? He just finished playing a no-hit run on both Sekiro and Dark Souls at the same time. However, now that he's done with that, he needs a new game to play so he doesn't get bored. GTA 6 still isn't out yet, so he starts searching online for another game to play in the meantime, and that's when he comes across a game that never ends. Normally, you'd be concerned about the fact that a game just loaded onto his computer without permission, but he's too captivated to go back now. So he starts scrolling through the settings wheel to set the difficulty. He wants his gaming experience to be as traumatizing as possible, so he turns the difficulty all the way up to hell mode and picks the untested summoner class just to make it even more unpredictable. He then accepts all the terms and conditions without a second thought, but it turns out that there was a clause in there about transporting Alan to another world, so the next thing he knows, he's a newborn baby in the countryside. A year goes by like this, and being a baby isn't as bad as Alan thought it would be. He doesn't have to work or pay any bills, and he has good, loving parents taking care of him. His father's name is Rodin, and his mother is Theresia, and they seem like a lovely couple, but considering the fact that Alan set the game to hell mode, they're likely going to get the Wayne family treatment sooner or later. After Alan is put to bed for the night, he raises his arms and tries all the key phrases he knows in an attempt to open a status screen, because even though he's supposed to be a summoner, he has no idea how the whole summoning thing works. He decides to give it one last try before going to sleep, and this time, something really does appear. But it startles Alan so much that he screams, and his parents come running over to check on him as soon as they hear it, so he is forced to hide the book for now. After making sure Alan is okay, his parents leave his room, and as soon as they are gone, he pulls out his book again. He is so relieved that he finally gets to see his stats after a whole year of trying, and it's around what you would expect for a 1-year-old summoner. His summoning skills are all bottom tier, but the book says they will level up the more he uses them, so Alan decides to give it a try right now. From what he can tell, he's only allowed to summon H-ranked insects and beasts at his current level, but that seems ridiculously weak, so he isn't expecting much. Just then, the book flips to the message section, and Alan finds out that he received a letter from the god of creation of this world. The god basically apologizes for the delay in creating Alan's status book, but since the summoner class was still under development, it took him a whole year to sort through all the necessary paperwork for it. Alan doesn't really care about the apology, but if the god dev team had to rush to finish the summoner class, then there must be some bugs left in there for him to exploit, so he's eager to test it out. He wants to summon an insect first, but he soon realizes that he doesn't actually know how to activate his summoning ability. Normally, he would check the subreddit or watch a tutorial for these kinds of problems, but he doesn't have any internet here, so he's going to have to figure it out on his own. He thinks about it for a few minutes and eventually realizes that he needs to create an insect skill card first, so he gives it a try, and it works perfectly. Now he can finally summon his insect, but before he could do so, his mother comes to check on him again, so Alan is forced to pretend that he's asleep again. The next morning, once his parents are busy with their daily duties, Alan opens his grimoire and finally summons the grasshopper. The room fills with tons of bright lights, and at first, Alan is mesmerized by how pretty it looks, but then a giant grasshopper flies into his face and he freaks out. He eventually realizes that this is the grasshopper he summoned, so he tries to give it instructions. But it turns out that even though it's a summon, it still only has grasshopper intelligence, so it can't understand a word he's saying. On the bright side, Alan finds out that summoning the grasshopper gave him a boost to his agility and endurance stats, and he's really happy about that, but all of his celebrating gets his mother's attention, and once she finds the giant grasshopper on the floor, she immediately squishes it. Over the next few days, Alan tinkers with the insect summoning ability, but he's tired of that now, so he decides to try out the beast summon next. He summons a mouse, and once again the book sends it flying straight at his face, but Alan was expecting it this time, so he's not as startled. The mouse comes with its own set of buffs, but it's still pretty dumb, so Alan can't really talk to it. That said, one of its abilities is called Scurry, and whenever Alan tells the mouse to use it, it does so without fail. That said, this mouse's ability is downright useless, so Alan figures he will need to level up his abilities in order to summon some of the more powerful creatures out there. His grimoire says he's allowed to stock up to 10 summoning cards at once, and fortunately, the buffs for each summon stack as well. So if he stacks 10 mouse summon cards, his attack and HP go up by 10. This already makes him stronger than any regular baby, but he's going to have to level up his skills if he wants to become truly overpowered. Normally, this wouldn't be hard to do, but remember how Alan selected Hell mode because he thought the difficulty would be fun? Well, leveling up now requires 100 times the normal amount of experience, so he's going to be stuck grinding for a long time. Just then, Rodden returns from a long day of hunting, and he's completely covered in blood, but it's okay because it's not his blood. He explains that he just hunted a great boar with the other men from the village, and Alan seems really interested, so Rodden asks him if he would like to come see it. Alan excitedly agrees, so Rodden hoists him onto his neck and starts taking him towards the kill site. This is Alan's first time actually getting to see the outside world, so he's enjoying all the new sights, but it took a lot longer to get to the boar than he thought it would, so he ended up falling asleep in Rodden's arms. Once they arrive at the kill site, Rodden wakes Alan up to show him the boar, and Alan is stunned because this thing is absolutely massive, and I'm not even sure how Rodden managed to take it down in the first place. A few moments later, the villagers nearby notice that Rodden has come back, so they all start cheering for him because he is today's MVP. Alan asks if a great boar is really that strong, so Gerda explains that it is a C-ranked monster, and it usually takes at least 20 men to take one down, so they are pretty tough. This info is really useful to Alan because it gives him a solid benchmark on the strength gap between ranks, but before he can even think about summoning any high-ranked monster, Alan is going to have to start grinding XP to level up. 10 months of intense grinding later, Alan has finally risen to a level 2 summoner, and the bump comes with great perks like an all-around boost to his stats, as well as the ability to summon G-rank creatures and fuse them. But doing so requires a lot of MP, so Alan hurriedly eats his dinner to recover some mana and heads back to his room to try it out. Unfortunately, when he opens his grimoire, it tells him he still doesn't have enough mana to fuse any summons because his max MP is too low, so it looks like he's going to need to do even more grinding before he can try anything new. By the time Alan is 3 years old, he has finally raised his MP stats high enough to use his level 2 skill, and with the fusion section, he is able to create a G-rank bird which he names Chappie. Chappie's main skill is voice mimic, and it can basically copy any voice perfectly, making it perfect for distracting enemies. Alan was also able to summon a frog and a mole, and the frog's only ability is to jump up and down while flashing as a distraction, but the mole is a lot more active and can dig a giant hole in a matter of seconds. The G-rank monster skills are a lot more useful than the H-ranks, so Alan is finally starting to enjoy the gaming experience in this world, but it's still going to take a long time before he's strong enough to actually fight anything. And speaking of fighting, Gerda's daughter, Krina, comes looking for Alan because she wants to play with him. Krina's idea of playing is challenging him to a duel, and normally, this wouldn't be a problem, but she's way too strong for Alan to keep up with. He even went all out with his summoned buffs just to give himself a fighting chance, but he's still no match for her. By the end of the day, Alan and Krina return home, and apparently, while Alan has been grinding his XP this past year, Rodden and Theresia were getting busy because she's pregnant again. Since his mother can't do much physical labor anymore, Alan volunteers to help with the harvest to make things easier for Rodin. He is sure he can do it because with all his buffs, he pretty much has the strength and stamina of an adult now. But Theresia and Rodden don't think it would be fair to make their son work, so they tell him he should just stick to doing basic house chores and playing with Krina. Rodden reminds him that he will eventually grow up and have to get a job, so he should enjoy his time as a kid while he doesn't need to work. Alan is a little upset about being turned down at first, but then he remembers that farm work is unbelievably grueling work, and no father would want to force their 3-year-old to do that kind of work, so he agrees to let it go. Rodden is glad to see that Alan understands, but as they continue with dinner, Theresia recalls seeing Alan in the backyard throwing rocks at a tree a little while ago, so she asks him what that was all about. Alan says he was just practicing for self-defense in case a monster attacks their home, but in reality, he was trying to see if he can learn skills aside from summoning by repeating an action over and over, but he didn't have much luck with that. Rodden is impressed by Alan's work ethic and says he can't wait for his appraisal ceremony. Alan has never heard of the appraisal ceremony before, so he asks Rodden what it is, and he is informed that when you turn 5, you are appraised to find out what talents you may have. And if Alan is lucky enough to receive a powerful talent, he might become very rich and successful in the future. Winter rolls around, and Alan decides to summon a grasshopper out in the snow to see how long it can survive, and it lasts a whole day out here, so he's pretty satisfied. However, that satisfaction quickly fades away when Krina comes outside and starts asking him to fight her again. Unsurprisingly, Alan ends up getting his ass handed to him. But while he was busy with his duel against Krina, he completely forgot about the grasshopper he summoned, and it ends up crawling onto Theresia's leg, scaring her so much that she ends up falling over. And falling over while pregnant is a big deal. Rodin runs over to check on her, and she says she's fine, but she clearly isn't because that fall just sent her into labor, so the baby's coming today whether they like it or not. Rodin tells Krenna to go call her mother for help, and once she arrives, she helps Theresia through the delivery process. So by morning, the family has a brand new baby boy. Everyone is overjoyed, but Alan doesn't know how he should feel about this. He still isn't sure why a game reincarnated him into this world. But even though it was unexpected, he didn't have much going for him back in Japan, so he's not upset with how things turned out. That's why he has decided to focus solely on leveling up and protecting his new family, because they matter the most to him. By springtime, since Alan's appraisal ceremony is coming up, he asks his dad for some details on what it's like. His dad tells him that all kids have to do it once they turn 5, and if he happens to have an amazing skill, he has a decent chance of making it to the big leagues. But unfortunately, there's a lot of competition this year since a lot of the other kids are also turning 5, and that includes Krenna. They all head to the commoner's city so they can undergo the appraisal, but as they approach the church, Alan notices that a lot of the other commoners look really well groomed. Compared to them, he's pretty much wearing rags, and now that he thinks about it, he's been wearing rags since the day he was born, so his family's finances must be way below average for this world, but that doesn't really bother him. They all gather in front of the church, and as the priests come out, they hear a lot of people making fun of the brokies in the crowd, so they tell everyone that they had better be careful of what they say. Blessings are distributed equally to all, so even the poorest farmer could inherit a powerful skill. The priests tell everyone to come inside for the appraisal, and as they are walking towards an altar, Alan notices 3 statues and assumes those must be the gods that are worshipped in this world. One of which is Elmea, the god of creation, and now that Alan thinks about it, Elmea was the one who sent him that apology letter for the class development delay. The first up for appraisal is Palomas, the son of the village chieftain, and he is instructed to place his hand on the crystal ball over there to display his stats. Palomas does as instructed, and on the stone wall, it is revealed that he possesses the merchant class, news that his father is really happy to hear. Alan was kind of expecting more to happen, but this is basically the same thing his grimoire does, with the only difference being the fact that it uses letter rankings instead of numbers. As the appraisal continues, some kids receive strong talents, while some don't receive any at all, and a few hours later, the only ones left are Krenna and Alan. Krenna is up next, so she excitedly runs up to the ball and puts her hand over it, but it suddenly starts glowing with an intense blinding light. Her father is worried that something might have gone wrong with the appraisal, but it turns out that the priests simply can't believe what they are seeing. According to the appraisal, Krenna just received the Sword Lord class, one of the strongest in existence, and her dad is unbelievably happy about it, but she doesn't really understand what's so special about it. Alan isn't too surprised by the news since he's been getting his ass beat by her for years at this point, but next up is Alan's appraisal, so he is told to approach the altar. As he touches the ball, nothing happens for a few seconds, but all of a sudden, there's a large flash of light, and Alan is knocked back. Rodin rushes over to check on him, and after making sure Alan is alright, he walks over to the priest and asks what Alan's talent is since he doesn't know how to read. He's expecting something really good since the crystal reacted strongly, but to his shock, the priest informs him that Alan is completely talentless. Alan can't believe what he's hearing because he knows for a fact that he does have a talent, but when he checks the board, he realizes that all his stats are E rank across the board, and he blames Elmea for doing a shitty job coding the summoner class. Just then, Rodin hugs Alan from behind to comfort him since he doesn't want Alan to feel bad about being talentless. They head home together, and everyone treats him normally despite the revelation that he is classless, and Alan appreciates how much his family cares for him, but he knows he isn't really talentless. He can still use his grimoire just fine, so he assumes his E-rank stats must be because he is playing on Hell mode. All the other kids were the same age as him, and relatively equal in strength, so their rank must be a reflection of how much they will grow in the future as they level up. So since Alan requires 100 times the regular amount of XP to level up, his stats are all stuck at E rank, even if his actual attributes are pretty strong. Most people would get frustrated by this kind of setback, but Alan isn't some filthy casual who enjoys playing games for actual fun. He lives for the soul-crushing grind, but he can't help but worry that there's something wrong with his summoner class because at the bottom of his appraisal, he saw a confusing error code pop up, so he's going to be sending a lot of complaints to the devs about it. The next morning, Alan goes out with his family to visit Krenna's family, but he notices that his dad has been acting a bit strange lately. Over at Krenna's house, they are all about to celebrate Krenna's appraisal as a sword lord, but Rodin still has a sour look on his face, and Jurda says he refuses to celebrate with him until he goes back to normal. At first, Alan wonders if Rodin is jealous of Krenna and her family, but he knows his dad isn't that petty, so there must be something else going on here. The two of them continue arguing for a second until Gerda reveals that Rodin mentioned severing ties between their families before they sat down together. Rodin defends his decision by reminding Gerda that Krenna is a sword lord now, and that means she practically has a guaranteed ticket out of this tiny serfdom, and if she's lucky, she might even become nobility if she's lucky. And if that happens, then being close to a poor family like Rodin's would only hold her back. Gerda yells that he doesn't care about any of that stuff, but Rodin keeps insisting that he's doing this for Gerda's own good, and the two resume their fight, but eventually, their wives pull them apart and get them to calm down. Alan is a bit surprised by how calm everyone was about this whole thing, so he asks Gerda's wife if it's normal for them to argue like this. She explains that this kind of thing used to happen all the time, but they always made up afterwards. All four of them are actually childhood friends who grew up in the same village, and around 10 years ago, when talks of making a new settlement started, they all decided to join the effort and work together to build their houses. Gerda and Rodin bonded a lot over that back then. Recalling the good times makes them realize how silly their fight was. A little while later, news arrives that the Knight's Order has shown an interest in Krenna, and they are coming to see her. Alan assumes the news of Krenna becoming a sword lord must be spreading really quickly. But while it's good that she has earned some recognition from the Knight's Order, Gerda is still a little concerned because she is too young to become a knight yet. Just then, one of the kids who got a good talent at the appraisal ceremony confronts Alan and tells him that as a talentless loser, he has no place here. Alan doesn't really care about being insulted, since he's still got his summoner power, but Krina won't stand for anyone picking on her best friend, so she tells the kid to back off and nearly chops off his finger before Gerda pulls her back. Just then, the chief announces that the Knight's Order has finally arrived, and everyone is thrilled since they rarely get to see the knights in person. The chief calls for Gerda and Krenna to come introduce themselves to the knight captain. Krenna is unbelievably excited because she has always wanted to become a knight, so getting to meet the knight captain must be a dream come true for her. Alan wonders if the knights are going to take Krenna to the capital to train her. But before the knight captain could say anything, Gerda speaks up and says he can't let Krenna go because she's still too young. The captain says that age doesn't matter because if she's a sword lord, then her skills would be more than enough to get her through the training, so there should be no problem. Unless, of course, they were lying about Krina being a sword saint just to trick the Knight's Order. Gerda assures the captain that he isn't lying, but it's already too late because the captain has decided to put Krina to the test. He orders his vice captain to prepare to have a duel with this 5-year-old, and without a second thought, the vice captain agrees. Gerda tries to get the knight captain to reconsider since he doesn't want to put Krenna's life at risk, but he is told that if she doesn't fight, then it will serve as proof that she lied about her class, and she, along with her entire family, will be executed. The knights then bring out a sword for her to use, and most children would be terrified by this point, but Krina is so battle-hungry that the second she realizes that she gets to use an actual sword, she says she is willing to accept the duel. Everyone gets into position for the duel, and Leibrand faces off against Krina. So as the match begins, Krina charges at Leibrand with full force. Your eyes do not deceive you. She's swinging a sword that's twice her height like it's nothing, and she's actually giving Leibrand a run for his money, but he is still keeping her at bay relatively easily. The knight captain seems unimpressed by Krina's skills so far, but as the fight goes on, she manages to block one of Leibrand's strikes and prepares to retaliate. However, Leibrand punts her across the street and into one of the walls. Gerda is enraged by the way his daughter is being treated, but before he could do anything about it, he is pushed to the floor by the knights, along with Alan and Rodin when they try to interfere. Alan thinks this is completely unfair, because whether Krenna is a sword lord or not, an adult is bound to have more battle experience than her. However, all of a sudden, Krenna gets back on her feet, and she's got a menacing aura surrounding her. Without saying a word, she launches another all-out attack with laser focus, and this time, she is completely overwhelming Leibrand, so much so that she eventually slices his sword in half and nearly takes his head off with it. Krina is disappointed that the fight is over already, but she had a lot of fun, so she thanks Leibrand for playing with her and walks off, leaving him with the knowledge that he just lost to a 5-year-old. Gerda is relieved that Krenna managed to survive and starts praising her for doing a good job, but then the knight captain approaches, and Gerda becomes defensive because he doesn't want him anywhere near his daughter. The knight captain now acknowledges that Krina is indeed a sword lord, and he apologizes for forcing her to fight in a duel. He says he would like to discuss her future with him, but Gerda firmly refuses. The captain says he can bring his friends with him to the meeting if it would make him feel better, and that would make Gerda feel a little safer, so he agrees. They all gather at the chief's house for lunch, and Zenov once again apologizes for the way he acted earlier. He explains that he was sent here by the baron of this territory to determine whether there truly was a sword lord in this village, and the results are undeniable. Zenov mentions that 3 years ago, there was a sword saint born to the family of a count, but this strikes Alan as weird since he knows for a fact that sword saints can only be born from low social statuses according to the game's design, so that one must have been a fake. Said sword lord went on to serve the royal family, but failed to meet expectations there, and upon reappraisal, it was discovered that they were actually an ordinary swordsman pretending to be a sword lord. It was also later discovered that several nobles were greatly exaggerating their abilities, so the kingdom had to establish a zero-tolerance policy for falsified talent results. That said, he is still truly sorry for putting Krenna through such a harsh trial. He tells Gerda that he doesn't need to worry about them taking Krenna away from him because they won't do that. They want her to continue her training at home, and when she turns 12, if she wants, she can attend the academy to become a knight. 2 years of training later, Alan finally unlocks level 3 of his grimoire, and he is really excited about it. The level up grants him the enhanced skill, which means he can strengthen his summons now, and he can also hold 30 F-rank ones at once now, so the buffs he can stack are going to be amazing. He plans to experiment with it later, but for now, he's got to head back inside for dinner. As for updates on Alan's family, his little brother is turning 2, and his mom is pregnant again, so he's getting another little brother or sister. His parents start thinking of a name for the new kid, and at that moment, Alan happens to receive a message from the god of creation, Elmia, so he unconsciously says his name out loud. His parents misunderstand and assume Alan is suggesting they should name the baby after the god of creation, which is a big no-no in this world, and Alan can't really explain why he said it. So he quickly changes the subject and mentions how Gerda's scars seem to have completely vanished recently. Gerda explains that it's because he passed the trial of the gods earlier today while fighting a boar, but Alan has never heard of such a thing before, so he asks what it means, and Gerda explains that every once in a while, after a battle, you feel your body being refreshed and all your wounds being healed, and Alan assumes it must be the effects of leveling up in this world. Gerda is a strong warrior, so he must level up quite often, but as for Alan, even though his grimoire is level 3, his body is still only level 1 because he hasn't fought any monsters yet, and if he wants to grow stronger, then he's going to have to engage in battle. However, that's easier said than done, because he isn't allowed to leave the village without permission. The only exception to that rule would be hunting expeditions, but the second Alan tries to bring up the idea of joining the next hunt, his father turns him down because he doesn't want Alan putting himself in danger. That night, once everyone else is asleep, Alan opens his grimoire to read the message he got from Elmia, and he already has a good idea of what it's about since he left a strongly worded complaint after the appraisal ceremony. Long story short, Elmia apologizes for the technical bug that made Alan appear talentless during the appraisal, but it has been fixed now, so the next time he gets appraised, his summoner class will show up. It also explains that all of Alan's ranks show up as E rank because of his Hell mode difficulty, but in reality, he is a lot stronger than E rank, so a separate stat section has been added for him. Alan takes a look at his new stat sheet, and it's a lot better than he thought it would be. He's got a bunch of S and A rank stats, which is about the same as what Krenna got, so he is satisfied with the results of all his efforts. Now that he's done with that, he decides to begin experimenting with his new abilities, and the first thing he wants to try is the enhanced skill, so he summons a grasshopper card and uses the skill. The effects of the skill boost the stats of the grasshopper directly, but it doesn't affect the buffs granted to Alan by extension. He decides to summon the grasshopper to see what a boosted summon looks like in person, and as it appears, it glows for a few seconds to indicate that it has been boosted. Aside from that, not much else is different, but before Alan could test out anything else, his mother suddenly comes in to check on him, and as soon as she spots the grasshopper, she freaks out and squishes it. The next morning, Gerda gets ready to go hunting, and while he's gone, Alan heads to the backyard to do a little more testing with his grimoire. He has attempted a bunch of different combinations in an attempt to unlock a new summon, but so far, nothing seems to be working, and he's done with his last pair of viable cards. Fortunately, this time, the fusion is successful, and he receives a new card, but he's not sure it's going to be useful, since its description says grass. On the bright side, it looks like the grass summon grants him an MP buff, so he can use it to increase the number of summons he can perform throughout the day. He then summons the grass card to find out what it's like, and an apple creature pops out, which leaves him even more confused than he was before. The apple doesn't have any combat skills, but it does possess a skill called Aroma, so Alan asks it to demonstrate, and it suddenly sinks into the ground before sprouting a stem. The stem does indeed have a wonderful aroma, but just then, Alan's mom comes to check on him again, and he tries to get the apple to hide itself, but it doesn't seem to be listening, so she ends up spotting the stem. Fortunately, she thinks it's just a regular stem, so she doesn't suspect anything, but Alan is still going to need to run a bunch of tests on this thing to figure out how it works. Later on in the day, Alan is training with Krenna as usually, and even with the extra buffs from his level up, he is still no match for her strength. But Krenna does notice that Alan has gotten a lot tougher. He is surprised to hear that, so he takes a look at his stats and realizes that his sword mastery stat is already at level 3 thanks to all the training he does with Krenna, and he is really happy that his skill is improving. Now that he thinks about it, he also recently got a dog summon that has a bite attack, and he would love to try it out, but he doesn't think it would be fair to use it on Krenna. After that, Alan spends the rest of the day throwing rocks at the tree in the backyard in hopes of awakening a new skill or something. But it hasn't been going well so far, so he's starting to feel like this is a huge waste of time. He also hasn't had a chance to do any other training since he has to look after his brother most of the time. Mash tells Alan that he's bored of throwing rocks at the tree, so Alan apologizes and says they can do something else after he gets a few more reps in. While Alan is preparing for his final tosses, Mash suddenly notices a bunch of saplings growing next to the house, and he is amazed since he doesn't recall seeing them there yesterday. Those saplings are the result of Alan activating a ton of apple summons at once for the MP buff, and thanks to the buff, he is able to fully restore his MP in 5 hours instead of the usual 6, so he can use over 15% more mana per day now. By nightfall, everyone gathers for dinner as usual, but Gerda isn't back from his hunt yet, which is really odd. Especially since they didn't intend to go deep into the forest today. Teresia is obviously worried, but she's trying to stay optimistic about the situation. However, all optimism goes out with Window and on CD. She hears the sounds of the panicked hunters carrying Rodden's body back home. Rodden was apparently injured during the hunt today, and just by looking at him, it's clear that he's lucky to be alive. He got hit by one of the boar's fangs in the gut, and while the other hunters managed to cauterize the wound to keep him alive, he's still on the verge of death. The only reason he even managed to last this long was thanks to the healing herb they gave him on the way here. Teresia is surprised to hear this since healing herb is really expensive, and she doesn't understand how they managed to get their hands on some. So Gerda explains that when the knight captain apologized for the way he treated them, part of the apology was a bag of gold coins, which is what they used to buy the herbs, but it wasn't enough to completely heal Rodden. The other hunters all start yelling about how this whole thing is those commoners' fault, but all the noise wakes Mash up and makes him start crying. So Alan takes him back to bed, and the rest of the hunters decide to leave, to give the family some peace and quiet for now. Once everyone has calmed down, Alan asks about what happened and if a commoner is really to blame for it all. Gerda explains that a few days ago, he and Rodden were summoned by the village chief and told that they should allow the commoners to join them on their next hunt. Boar meat is a valuable commodity, and while most of it has to go to the Baron, the rest is split amongst the people involved in the hunt. They sometimes trade it for other goods, but aside from that, it's difficult to get any decent boat meat unless you hunt for it yourself. Despite this, no commoners have ever volunteered to be part of the hunts, and it's because it's an extremely dangerous task. There are casualties every year, and even more injuries, so for commoners usually avoid getting involved. But since Rodden recently became famous as a legendary hunter, many commoners got the impression that as long as Rodden was around, they could just let him handle dealing with the boar while they reaped the benefits afterwards, so they asked the chief to include them in the hunts. Rodden and Gerda were against the idea, but they couldn't refuse an order from the chief, so they were forced to let the commoners join, and it went just as bad as they thought it would. During training sessions, all the commoners were slacking off, and when the time finally came for the hunt, the moment they actually came face to face with a boar, they all got scared and dropped their weapons as they ran away. This completely broke up the hunting party's formation, but as if that wasn't bad enough on its own, one of the commoners fell over while the boar was chasing him, so Rodden instinctively stepped in to protect him, but he got skewered in the stomach as a result. The others eventually managed to slay the boar, so Gerda says he will bring the share of meat meant for Rodden by tomorrow, but there's not much else he can do to help. And Alan feels like a total loser because up till now, he had been focusing on only leveling himself up instead of actually helping his family. By the next morning, Rodden regains consciousness, and everyone is happy that he is alive, but Alan is still deep in thought. He had been treating this world like a game this entire time, but to the people that live here, this isn't a game. It's their reality, and they have to struggle to survive, so the least he could do is use his power to help them. A little while later, Gerda returns with Rodden's share of the meat as promised, and he is relieved to see that Rodden is awake, but he's still in terrible shape, so he's probably not going to be able to hunt anymore to prepare for winter. Gerda offers to share his stockpile with Rodden and his family to help, and Rodden appreciates it, but all of a sudden, Alan speaks up and tells everyone that he wants to take over for Rodden. They can all tell that he's serious about it, so there are no objections, and later that morning, he gets to work by fetching some water from the well. The other men there warn him not to overdo it since that much water would be difficult for a child, but Alan is easily able to carry it home. Till now, he had been hiding the effects of his stat buffs, but with everyone already focusing their attention on Krenna since she's an upcoming hero, it should be fine for him to stand out a bit. After he's done fetching water, he heads out into the fields with Gerda to harvest the potatoes. Gerda demonstrates the best method to pull the potatoes out of the ground, and he assumes Alan is going to struggle with it, but to his surprise, Alan is able to do it one-handed. He harvests 3 baskets of potatoes in no time, but after all that work, he realizes that more than half of these have to be given away to the Baron, and that's really unfair. He's trying to figure out how to get more food for his family, but all of a sudden, the chief shows up, and he's here to apologize to Rodden. It was partially his fault that Rodden ended up like this, so he wanted to make things right, and he also brought the guy who caused the accident to apologize as well. The guy doesn't seem like a bad person. He was just too scared to think straight back then, and he accepts full responsibility for the situation. Rodden isn't really mad at him, but he tells the guy to be more careful next time, and he promises not to make the same mistake twice. Later on, Alan heads out into the fields and clears out a wide area because he came up with an idea. He summons a bunch of frogs and has them use their provoke skills to lure out some potential prey. However, instead of the few ducks that he was expecting, he actually ends up attracting a monster bird. At first, he thinks it's best to run away while he still can, but then he realizes that it would really help his family if he defeated the bird. Plus, he's got a bunch of stats boosts, so he thinks he should be strong enough to handle it and ends up deciding to attack. He runs in and whacks the bird across the head while it's not looking, and then he summons several dogs to attack it all at once. The dogs are doing a fair bit of damage, but unfortunately, the bird is too strong for them, so it takes them out, one after the other. It then goes after Alan, and since his summons have all been defeated, he has lost the majority of his buffs as well, so he is in serious danger here. He needs to act quickly if he doesn't want to end up as bird food, so when he gets the chance, he summons 2 leeches that start sucking on the bird's neck. Alan had never really tested them out before this, but thankfully, as expected, they seem to have an energy drain ability, so they can weaken the bird enough for him to stand a chance. Once they gets himself free, Alan summons even more leeches and wolves, and with their combined efforts, he is finally able to deal the finishing blow and defeat the monster. Alan can hardly believe it since this is his first kill, but his grimoire confirms that the bird is indeed dead, and he even received 100 XP as a reward. Later that day, Alan returns home with the bird, and his entire family is left speechless because they can't believe he actually managed to kill something like that. Alan tells them he just happened to catch it off guard while it was distracted, which is mostly true, but he did leave out the part about his summons. Gerda starts inspecting the bird's corpse because he is wondering how Alan managed to beat it with just a wooden sword and some rocks, but then he notices some bite marks on the bird and asks Alan about them. Alan makes up an excuse and says he was fighting on instinct, so he had to do whatever was necessary. And Gerda begins picturing Alan biting down on the bird for dear life. But regardless of how he pulled it off, it's still an impressive feat, so he congratulates him on a job well done. He even offers to help Alan bleed and dry the meat, since this is his first time. So they head over to the rack together. The Aldebaran weighs around 60 kilograms, but once it has been bled dry, it drops to around 20 kilos, and only around half of the bird's meat is actually edible. That said, the wings do fetch a pretty penny, and it does come with a magic stone, but at the end of the day, they still have to fork most of it up to the higher-ups. Alan thinks the whole 60% tax on all food thing is really unfair, and Gerda agrees with him, but there's nothing they can do about it. At least that would normally be the case, but since Alan's situation is a bit unique, they might be able to negotiate the chief into letting them keep more than usual. A little while later, both Alan and Gerda head to the chief's office to tell him about the bird Alan caught, and the chief is very pleased. But then Gerda suggests that Alan should only hand over the wings as tax and keep the rest for himself. This catches the chief off guard, and he tries to explain that they can't do that because the Baron has requested more food than usual this year. But then Gerda reminds the chief that the only reason Alan was forced to go out and hunt was because of his unreasonable demand that led to Rodden getting injured. At this rate, Alan's family might actually starve since they barely have enough to eat, and to really sell the story, Alan acts like he's going to faint from hunger on the spot. The chief feels really guilty, but he's still hesitant to cut Alan's taxes, so to sweeten the deal a little, Gerda offers to throw in the bird's magic stone. The chief eventually agrees to the deal, and Alan and Gerda are really happy to hear that. But they aren't done yet, because Alan asks if this means he can keep all the meat aside from the wings with any future birds he catches. The chief is once again hesitant to agree, but Gerda reminds him that it's pretty rare for a kid to catch an Aldebaran all on his own, so what are the odds of it happening again? The chief eventually agrees to let Alan keep most of the meat of any of his future catches under the assumption that he won't be able to catch another bird anytime soon, but he was wrong. Later on, Alan heads back out into the fields, and this time, he manages to lure in 2 Aldebarans at once. By now, he has gotten the strategy down pat, so he sends out the leeches first to weaken the birds, and after that, he throws some rocks at their heads to disorient them. Next, he orders his wolves to attack with full force, and after they've whittled down the birds' health, he whacks them over the head with his sword to finish them off. Alan has been going on hunts every 3 days for a while now, but this is the first time he has ever managed to succeed without losing a single one of his summons, so he's really pleased with himself. And to make it even better, he has finally gained enough XP to go up to level 2. He excitedly opens his status screen so he can see how much his stats went up, and it looks like he got a 60% boost to his stats, which is a little less than what he was expecting. But it's still a huge increase, so he's happy regardless. It took him 6 years to go up 1 level, but now that it has finally happened, he thinks it's about time that he lets his family know the truth about him. A little while later, he returns home with both of the birds, and his father is amazed that he managed to catch 2 of them at once. But he also notices that there's something different about Alan today. However, Alan still has a bunch of other things to do, including his sparring session with Krenna, so he leaves before Rodden gets a chance to say much. After today's haul, Alan has officially captured 10 birds total, so his family should be able to use that to make it through the winter. He would like to keep hunting birds to see if he can make it to level 3, but he doubts he would be able to find that many birds in time. Thanks to his stat boost, Alan can keep up with Krenna a lot easier now. But he got distracted by his thoughts for a moment, and that was enough time for her to sneak up from behind and smack him on the head. Later that night, Alan calls a meeting with his family, and once they are all present, he informs them that he isn't actually talentless. He can't reveal the exact details, but he basically explains that when he was a baby, he received an oracle from the god Elmia, and that means he is smarter and stronger than the average person, but he's also going to have to work 100 times harder than normal to grow stronger. His parents believe him, but they are devastated because it sounds a lot like Alan was cursed, and they aren't wrong, but it was actually self-inflicted when he chose to play on Hell mode. Alan also tells them that the only reason he was appraised as talentless was because his talent was too new to be recognized. His parents are amazed to hear that and ask if this means Alan really does have a talent, but he tells them he doesn't know what it is yet. He thought about revealing the fact that he's a summoner at first, but he eventually decided not to, because he doesn't know how people will react once they find out that he can summon and control living creatures. Even though they don't know what Alan's talent is, they are relieved to find out that he is talented, because now it makes sense why he spent so much time throwing rocks at trees and hunting monsters, but they wish he would have told them sooner. Rodden asks Alan what he plans to do from now on, and Alan says he's going to continue doing his best to grow stronger, so his dad reminds him that he should feel free to ask for help if he needs it. But in the meantime, he probably shouldn't mention this to anyone else, because it would be really bad if he were mistaken for a false prophet. Though, it's probably fine to talk to Gerda about it since he isn't a snitch, and Rodden really wants to brag to him about how amazing Alan is. The next day, the first winter snow hits, so it's time for Alan to start bartering with the bird meat he stocked up on, and Gerda is coming along to show him the ropes. Gerda plans to trade in some of the boar meat he stocked up on before the winter. Fortunately, there haven't been any more accidents since. As long as there are no commoners to mess things up, the hunts usually go pretty smoothly, but hearing that gets Alan thinking, and he wonders what the difference is between serfs like him and Gerda, and the commoners. Gerda explains that commoners have a higher social standing than serfs, and the taxes they pay are also a bit different. Whereas serfs have to pay 60% of all the food they make as taxes, commoners only have to pay a head tax, meaning they pay 1 gold coin per person each year. Alan asks if it's possible for a serf to become a commoner, and Gerda explains that it is indeed possible, but you'd need to pay a tribute of 10 gold coins in order to do so. Alan does some quick math, and since his mom has another baby on the way, he would need to pay 50 gold coins for all of them to become commoners, which is a lot of money, but he's going to make it happen sooner or later. Alan spends the rest of the day shadowing Gerda to learn how much his bird meat is worth in the barter system, and by day 2, he has a decent enough understanding of it to make the trip on his own. A bag of salt costs him around 5 pieces of jerky, and that same bag of salt would be worth 5 silver coins, so 1 piece of meat is worth 1 silver coin. With the currency system, 1 gold coin is worth around 100 silver coins, So if Alan wants to save up 50 gold coins for his family, then he is going to need to hunt for the equivalent of 500 pieces of the Aldebaran meat. That seems like a lot, but Alan is sure he can get it done within a few years. For his next stop, Alan heads to the local potion store and asks if they have any MP recovery potions. The store clerk tells Alan he doesn't sell anything that fancy, so Alan asks if he has any healing herbs in stock instead. Hearing Alan mention the healing herb strikes a nerve with the store clerk because he got a bad deal last time he sold one. He recalls that a guy named Gerda came in here, begging to buy some healing herb to save his buddy. It usually costs 5 gold coins, but Gerda only had 3 at the time, so he begged the store clerk to give him a discount and promised to pay it back later. Gerda seems so desperate that the clerk decided to help him out, and to his credit, he did come back to pay the balance later. But the clerk was really worried that he might have gotten scammed at the time. Alan knows that his father wouldn't have survived if the clerk hadn't agreed to give Gerda a discount that day, so he thanks him for his kindness and offers him a piece of bird meat as a gift. Later on, Alan is walking through the streets when he spots a weapons shop, and he is surprised that a single weapon can cost as much as 50 gold on its own. But while he's minding his own business, all of a sudden, Dagora comes out of nowhere and picks a fight with him. He tries to assert dominance and convince Alan to become his minion, but Alan isn't going to let that kind of disrespect slide, so he sets his baggage down and pulls out his wooden sword before pointing it at Dagora. Now, he could beat Dogora's ass right now and be done with it, but he wants this to be a fair ass whooping, so he tells Dogora to go get himself a weapon. Dagora accepts the challenge and runs off to get his club, and he thinks he's got the upper hand, but Alan is a lot more skilled when it comes to combat thanks to his training with Krina, so he easily mops the floor with Dagora. Long story short, by spring, Dagora starts coming over to Alan's house so Alan can train him, but he's still a long way off from being able to compete. Mash has also begun training with Krina, but she's taking it a lot easier on him than she would with Alan since he's still new to combat. While Alan is watching the two of them, Dagora tries to sneak attack him, but Alan's reflexes are too quick for that, so he ends up falling over and hurting his knee in the process. That night, Rodden and Gerda return, and they've got some bad news because they were just in a meeting with the village chief, and he says the Baron wants them to deliver 15 boars instead of the usual 10 this year. He is also demanding that they allow the commoners to hunt with them again this year, but after what happened last time, Rodden and Gerda were wholeheartedly against it. Even so, they can't go against a direct order from the Baron, so they have no choice but to let it happen and hope for the best. Just then, Alan speaks up and tells everyone he has a plan. The reason having commoners join the hunt is a problem is because they are pretty much useless, but he has countless hours of experience in every MMO imaginable, and he is confident he can make even the most hopeless newbie useful to the team, so he asks to be put in charge of training the commoners before the hunts. This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.